वक्रतुण्डमहाकाय सूर्यकोटिसमप्रभा निर्विघ्नं कुरु मे देव सर्वकार्येषु सर्वदा सर्वकार्येषु सर्वदा सर्वकार्येषु सर्वदा गुरुर्ब्रह्मा गुरुर्विष्णुः गुरुर्देवो महेश्वरः गुरुर्साक्षात् परब्रह्मा तस्मै श्री गुरवे नमः।
Namaste everyone. Welcome to the Yes Talk evening. Welcome Dr. Bhattacharya. Today we have Dr. Bhattacharya speaking about bridging the Eastern and Western thought process on Ayurveda, bridging the gap. Dr. Bhattacharya is a Harvard-educated, licensed, board-certified physician trained in family medicine and preventive medicine. She divides her time between Manhattan, Paris, and Benares. She's also a senior Fulbright scholar, an award-educated, best-selling author, and a published scientist. She's trained in pharmacology, neuroscience, public health, community medicine, and Ayurveda. Since 2003, she serves as a clinical assistant professor in the Department of Medicine at Weill Cornell Medical College in New York. She is the founder of Dincharya Institute, which brings the wisdom and science of authentic traditional medicine, such as Ayurveda, back to the hands and hearts of the people. She completed a mid-career PhD in ancient Indian chemistry, Ayurvedic pharmaceutics, and pharmacology from Banaras Hindu University with an award-winning PhD thesis on polyherbal formulations for diabetes. She's a 2018-23 Fulbright specialist in public health specializing in integrative medicine. The documentary film Healer's Journey into Ayurveda on the Discovery Channel features her work. Her book, Everyday Ayurveda, is a national bestseller published by Penguin. And I can just show you a little glimpse of this. This is how it looks. You can go check it out. It's a ancient wisdom brought to people like us in a very simple and effective language. So once again, we welcome you, Dr. Bhattacharya, and over to you. Looking forward to the session. Thank you.
Namaste to everyone. I had a little bit of difficulty with my computer, but I think everything is working fine. And I think I'm just going to test my slides. But before I do that, let me ask of the group of people that are here. We don't know your backgrounds. And so one of the things that I find is that some people will find it above their heads and too difficult, and others will find it too simple and they want more science, or they say, oh, this is just a very general talk. It's practical, but I want to know the scientific basis. And since I know that Dr. Bijlani is a physician who has been working with yoga for decades and is bridging the gap between very technical scientific ways of looking at health and healing, and then bridging that with more holistic and logical concepts which have their own science, but the sciences of observation and logic, I wanted to just check and see whether or not all can, I guess you could raise your hands if you are on your video conference, or you could use your reaction button, which is there, and let me know. I'd like to know how many of you are physicians and want to hear more of the technical parts. Yeah, I know that there's a disturbance, but that I've just plugged in my earphone. Is that better, Preeti? Okay, I hope that that is better. I didn't have my earphones in. Yeah, thank you. Good. It's a good reminder for me. So it looks like none of you are physicians except for Dr. Jayesh Thakkar, and I am okay with that. I have just come back from giving a wide series of talks, one to the Indian Army, where people are very practical and they really want to know how to change their lives because they're in chronic stress. I also spoke with ICCR, which is cultural relations, and they wanted to know more of the historical context of Ayurveda and how that fits into the cultural world of Indian traditional knowledge. And then I spoke at a group which were physicians, all physicians. It was a Government of India pharmacovigilance, so they wanted very technical information. So what I'm going to do is, since none of you, except for the two that I know, are physicians, I'm going to speak and hope that you will use the chat if I say things that you don't understand, okay? So I'll look for questions in the chat. I've got my chat here open, and I hope that you will open your mind to yoga or to Ayurveda, knowing that you already have some knowledge of yoga and of the Indian traditional systems. So I'm still trying to share my screen again. I'm hoping that someone will enable me. I keep trying, but let me know when you guys have allowed me to share my screen, and then I will do that. Okay, great. So this is a talk that I love to give because it involves some of the journey that many of us have when we go to college, or we go to intermediate schooling, higher schooling, and we learn science, and we learn biology, chemistry, physics, some mathematics, maybe a couple of other allied sciences like astronomy or geology. And we learn that that is the truth, that is science, and that is truth. And we really don't learn other things, whether we're schooled in India or in any other country. But especially in India, many of us have families who will also be teaching us. So we'll have what's kind of like a separate school. So in Christians, they have their day school, which is the civic school, and then they have Sunday school. Or for Jews, they have their synagogue school. So for many of us who are Hindus, we also had a schooling that was about our parampara, or about our Hindu knowledge, Hindu systems of knowledge. And in that, we learned a totally different way of looking at science. We learned Nyaya as logic. We learned about dates and times in a very different way. And we learned a version of history that was really different from the school books. And for those of us who were encouraged to become doctors, we learned that the science that we needed to memorize wasn't necessarily the science that our grandmothers or our Purva Purush taught us, but it was the science that we had to learn. And so those of us who have learned Ayurveda in one way, I'm calling this another introduction to Ayurveda, because I'm going to take us forward, assuming that people are not Ayurvedic physicians here, but that are interested in the science of how the traditional medical science works. And there will be some mainstream science, simply because all of us have gone to school where we've learned biology, chemistry, and physics. So I always begin by giving thanks to my gurus. These are the people who have taught me. On the West are people from my Western training in pharmacology and neuroscience and modern medicine and public health. And then my parents, of course, and Lord Dhanvantari. But then I moved over to the Ayurvedic side, actually by making a film for the Discovery Channel, in which I learned about the clinical applications of Ayurveda and became fascinated that we don't learn many of these things in our trainings as doctors. And it kind of angered me, because it made me feel like
I had gone to all of this schooling, but I wasn't given a chance to learn any of these things. So here are some of the questions. Now, when we go to the Gita and it says Krishna Uvacha, it doesn't mean Krishna says, it means Krishna answered the question that. So you have to ask a question to get an answer. And in fact, when we ask questions, our minds open up to answers. So I'm just going to put some questions in your head so that you can ponder them. And then when we discuss answers, your mind might be more oriented or open toward the discussion. So one question is, how can yoga and Ayurveda optimize the function of your body? And this is the place where most people want to start and end, because they don't really want to learn a lot of the philosophy and the shlokas and the science of it if it doesn't have any application in their own body, especially because most Indians have been taught that there's a lot of hocus pocus and garbage and superstition and things in Ayurveda. Whether or not that's true, that's what many people have been taught. And certainly if you go to the doctor who gives you a prescription for some medicine and you say, well, is there another alternative? They'll say, oh, all of that stuff doesn't work. It's just jari booty, or it's just fake stuff, or it's just quackery. And I've had people say to me, well, why do you want to take quack medicine? And I say, well, how do you define quack? So there's this whole idea of, can it actually optimize function in your body? What are some of these terms and how does it work? So we will talk a bit about ahara, which is food, vihara, which is lifestyle, which includes dinacharya, ritucharya, and oshadham, which refers to all of these medicines that people think is all of Ayurveda, whether it's the herbal formulations or the kwath or the oils or the bhasmas or any other formulation of taking herbs. Ultimately, we want to build ojas, which is the sense of strength and vitality, and we want to build and fortify the immune system. So as I just said earlier, how do Ayurveda and yoga work? Science chips away at what is false and say, that's not true. Hypothesis testing says that's not true. That's not true. So what's left is in the realm of supposed truth. But Ayurveda says we're not going to start by chipping away at things based on hypotheses that we are biased enough to propose. We're just going to draw patterns of observation. And while you will draw connections between dots based on your preconceived notions, if you are a keen observer, what you observe as true is part of your reality. And Ayurveda says that your own reality stems from your orientation, from your heart, and whether or not you're connected from your thinking mind to your feeling mind, which we tend to connect with our thinking mind as the brain and our feeling mind as the heart. And if that is true for you, even if it's not true for another person, that is your reality. That's a very subjective reality, and it's not one that science ascribes to. So there's a big difference between the way that Ayurveda looks at health and science looks at health. And so what I've always proposed is that rather than translate what we found in Ayurveda, so you have neem, and so you have to find these, as a direct to indica, you have to find these specific chemicals, and that's what validates neem. That is what science says. Ayurveda says, just take the neem, eat the leaves, take the decoction of the bark, use the seed of the oil of the seed. If it works for you, that is evidence that it works for you. And we're not going to try to put you on a X bar average with a large clinical trial saying this is the average that works for everyone, because there is no average everyone according to Ayurveda. It's very personalized. And so understanding just these tenets is going to help you to answer this question of how does Ayurveda work? How does yoga work as we move through the slides? And the last I put in for the technical audience, how can scientists see Ayurveda? And we've talked about some of these issues, but we'll talk about, some of the things that have happened historically that prevent us from being able to see. So I always start with studies because I feel like everyone has heard Ayurveda. Ayu means life. Veda means science. Ayurveda is the science of life. We've all heard that. So let's start with something interesting here. How many of you have had oil, hair oil, put on your head since the time you were a young kid? How many of you had oil massaged into your head? I think most Indians have, right? So I see several of you have your hands up. And I will say that if you can put on your video screen, and you do, you'll get a lot more out of this lecture, because I do tend to ask questions to involve you. And I think all of you who can open your videos will find it much more engaging. So if you have put hair oil on your head and you've massaged it, and then you talk to anyone who's a doctor, they'll say, oh, that's just a bunch of hogwash, because everyone knows that the circulation, the blood flow from the scalp is completely different from the blood flow that goes into the brain. What do you think? That you can actually put herbs or medicines on your head and that they're going to go into your brain? Ha, 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 ha. And they would laugh. And I'd say, yeah, but my mom said, my mom, the source of all truth, right? For me, I would say, but my mom said, and they would say, oh, your mother is, part of that whole Indian samskara, like superstition. So, I went home and I said, Mom, teachers don't believe that hair oil has any purpose. So can we stop oiling my hair? I said, no, we're going to oil your hair, because the medicine, the amalaki or the bringaraj or whatever's in your hair is going to get into your mind and keep you cool. So there's the home truth and there's the school truth. There's the Ayurveda, Indian sciences, traditional sciences truth at home with your dad who does pujas and your mom who has a kitchen pharmacy, and your science truth, which is all the things that you answer in the school books and the things that you answer at, at school. And by the way, this is true in most colonial civilizations, that you have the truth according to the colonial rulers that you have to say in order to not get shot or put in prison, and the truth of what your traditions tell. It's the same when I was in Nigeria. It was the same when I was in Native American lands. It's the same in many parts of India. Okay, so about 3 years ago now, almost, there was a study that came out on the emissary veins and how it shows that actually there are these veins that go from the hair follicles where the oil gets put on your scalp, and through those hair follicles down through these small veins. This group did some radiologic MRI study, and they found that it went through the scalp, through these micro veins, and actually into the main part of the brain and drained into the main sinus, the collection of cerebrospinal fluid in the middle of the brain. And they were able to see that the emissary brains, these ones that are emissary means like a one who crosses borders, right? Like an emissary is like a diplomat between two countries. So the outside country, which is outside the skull, which is called extracranial nervous system or venous system, with the intracranial, means inside the skull venous. And so it connects the veins outside on the scalp of the brain that's holding the hair to what's inside, and drains from the scalp through the skull and into these venous sinuses, which is really important because it means it's getting into the inside the skull. And from there, from these venous sinuses, there was actually a separate study that showed that it goes into the intracranial veins. Here it says this, and it shows that actually Ayurvedic prescriptions for hair oil, especially those that will cool your head, are actually getting inside your head, inside your brain. Now, many of you know that as the seasons are changing, now it's getting hotter in India. Many of us are switching over from the mustard oil or the other kind of oil we were using in January when it was so cold, to now using coconut oil or amalaki oil to keep our hair cool. And there's a reason for this, because it actually does help our neurotransmitters in our brain kind of workings to signal to the rest of our body. And here's another study, which is actually from a cancer paper, but it says that the immune system has all these different components that are being understood but are not well understood around cancer. So this is a paper called Cancer Letters that talks about the different immune cell functions. And basically what they're saying is we kind of know, but we don't really know how it works. On the other side of the ocean or the world is this idea of ojas. And ojas is this concept, this theory of resilience and vitality that Ayurveda has said, this is from a classic book called the Charaka Samhita, in the first section called the Sutra Sthan in chapter 17, it says the decline of ojas starts with what? So if you have very good immunity, what starts decaying away at your immunity? It is living in fear, having constant weakness, meaning not building up your body with fortifying foods and fortifying action like exercise or dhyan, yoga, lack of fortification with food and happiness, having worry, having affliction of pain constantly, loss of the complexion, hopelessness, lack of cheer, roughness, meaning being dry all the time, and emaciation. These things lead to the decline of ojas, and ojas is that immunity. So if you think that it's okay to stay unhappy because someone died last year in April and that anniversary is coming up, or you might have had a very traumatic, some event happen, and so you are lacking that happiness. Happiness is not a place you get to when everything's okay. Happiness is a choice you make today. And in fact, some of the most popular courses in some of the best universities are actually on happiness, because people who are super smart think that if I get really good grades, or if I get into engineering college, or if I get this job, or if I buy this house, or if I marry this guy because my parents are telling me to, then I'll be happy. And they're not happy, and they just keep wondering when it's going to happen. And it's a choice. It's a choice. And Ayurveda says, make that choice, because it's about your ojas. So there's one more study I want to show, and then we'll move into some basic concepts. And that is the choice of using yoga and meditation to have a strong mind. So these are actually from a column that I write every week. It's a newspaper column in New York. And I talk about how 80 to 90% of all diseases, all imbalances, all lack of health is from the mind or the gut. So when the mind is not strong or the gut is not fortified, that is when disease can set in. And so these are actually written for laypersons. So if you're interested, I'll share a link with you a little bit later that you can go and find these columns and read them. So I had put this in so you would understand, but I think I've already talked about ojas as being resilience and strength. And I want to start with some basic concepts. So here's a basic concept that many people do not understand in the basic, what I'll call Ayurveda 101. And that is that many people think that Ayurveda means these herbs. Ayurveda is herbs. If I take tulsi, I'm doing Ayurveda. If I have neem, I'm doing Ayurveda. Oh, if I eat turmeric, I'm having Ayurveda. That is not Ayurveda. Ayurveda is looking at the body and the imbalances as a function of doshas, dhatus, mala, and concepts of Ayurveda, and then using modalities that utilize those concepts to restore balance. So in the top 1/4, we have things that are known in modern medicine, such as diet, lifestyle changes, exercise, some fasting. All of these are pretty much known by modern medicine. And modern medicine does acknowledge that there's some role to these, even though modern medicine generally, we tend to prescribe drugs and tests and surgeries, and that's pretty much it. We say, go home and eat good food. But doctors are not very good at teaching about diet. And the main reason is because doctors themselves don't eat a good diet. They're not walking the talk. They're not taught how to walk the talk. And so they don't know how to. They don't have a good lifestyle. I used to work 18, 20 hours a day. My shifts were 42 hours long. And I didn't learn about balanced lifestyle at all. And I spent 30 or 30 years of my life in unbalanced lifestyle. And so, we were taught to be warriors and soldiers. We were not taught to be balanced. And exercise meant taking the stairs instead of the elevator or running to the operating room. There was just no other recreational exercise. But that does not give us the tools to use these as modalities for our patients. In the middle part are Ayurvedic modalities, which are really about the subtle energies, which Ayurvedic medicine emphasizes, but modern medicine doesn't. So meditation on a daily basis, self-massage or getting oil massage from someone else, yoga asanas and the stretching and toning of the musculoskeletal system, not by a physiotherapist that's moving your arm, but by yourself choosing to move your arm and allowing that neuromotor cortex to coordinate with your own hand rather than having the passive stretch by another person, which never establishes that nerve to muscle connection the way that you doing it yourself would. So yoga asanas are key, and yoga therapy is always about the patient engaging rather than a physical therapist externally. Pranayama is about breath work, and it's not just we breathe every day, but systematic patterns of time and holding, which is called kumbha, which allow the lungs, but also the mind to have control over something that is an autonomic reflex. And all of you, if you haven't already learned, should try to use a conch shell, which is a shank, or just use the clock and try to breathe for counts of 6 or 8 continuously out in an even way. Most people can't do it. But when you can do it, it means that your mind has control over your breath. And it's one of the greatest controls that you can have, especially if you get a disease like a respiratory disease that COVID-1, the 2020 version gave us, or even some of the other distresses that people experienced. And aromatherapy, massage, foods as medicine, sound therapy, which is the use of ragas. These are all important aspects of Ayurveda, and we use them actively. So if you think, well, Ayurveda just uses herbs, that's actually quite wrong. It's not the way that a good Ayurvedic doctor will work. Sometimes people get lazy, so what they do is just give an Ayurvedic formulation because it's easy to write and you make more money from it. But the right thing to do is to help patients learn which raga to listen to. Like if you're mourning someone's death right now or a loss, from 4 to 7 right now, if you take 20, 25 minutes and listen to Raga Marwa, it's very good for helping people to get rid of that edge of kind of a mourning, bereavement, sadness that grips you. It's not that you'll forget the person that died. It's that you will not have that biting pain that you would have otherwise. How does raga do this? How do the classical Indian music ragas create this? Well, sound goes into your ear and creates a change in your brain, which then changes your neurochemicals. And we know that sound can affect us because anyone that does housework that puts on a good beat so that they can, get their jharu pocha done or get their dishes done knows that using the beat of music can really help us. But using the ragas is actually therapeutic on a subtle energy level. In the third column, we have the Ayurvedic modalities, which are very specific to Ayurveda. So these first series were much more known to modern medicine. The second are kind of considered the CAM or alternate medicine or alternative and complementary medicine. The third ones are very unique to Ayurveda. Rasayanas, which are tonics for rejuvenation. The Marma points, which are predecessors of acupuncture and acupressure points. The care of the 5 senses, what we sometimes call 5 sense therapy. Panchakarma, which is an oil-based cleansing, which is always 2 weeks to 6 weeks long and never shorter. And then the herbal formulations, which all of you think and are taught is the main part of Ayurveda, which is the formulations that either are put on your skin or taken by your mouth or put into your nose, or sometimes put in as suppositories into one of your lower openings. The last section is also Ayurvedic modalities, as are all the ones above it, but it is really about the subtle energies in a way that many people find very unacceptable because they've gone to schools where they've learned that this is unacceptable. So this includes the idea that Jyotish might have an effect on your life, which is sometimes called horoscope or astrology. It's the idea that the subtle energies, which are called Daiva Chikitsa or of the gods. If you understand that gods are not some guy sitting, in a white robe up in the clouds or on a cross or something, but that God, Bhagavan, means that power that is within you on your subtle energy level, how your DNA know what to do, how your organs know what to do, how the ecosystem of your inner body and of your outer body knows how to behave. That is what Deva is. And so of the Deva is Daiva. So Daiva Chikitsa. In addition, the power of sound that we talked about for ragas can also be applied by using mantras. And so if you have ever chanted, like we heard this beautiful, gorgeous voice at the beginning of this talk, who was singing that mantra, the quality of that music coming into our ears, if we use certain sounds, and usually they are the well done language, which is called Sanskrit, which means well done, that well done language and the mantras of it can actually shift things. And if you don't believe it, I have a couple of mantras. Like I have a mantra which I do if I lose something. And if I repeat it again and again, that thing comes back to me. I have done it for wallets. I've done it for major things I've lost as well as minor things I've lost. And it's been amazing. The last is gemstone therapies. The gemstones have a certain energy. The crystals have a certain vibration, and they have a piezoelectric, you can say like a electrical force or electromagnetic force. And that force is can affect us. So you'll see that some people will wear amulets around their neck or on their, their fingers will all have stones, or they'll wear it on their upper arm. So those amulets or those gemstones are part of gemstone therapy. And sometimes it's in coordination with mantras and with the Jyotish. But these are all different modalities that are part of Ayurveda. So when we bridge from the old to the new, we have to see that what we're doing is using what was known from our grandfathers' that was handed down continuously, generation to generation. So I can't say that what my grandmother knew was wrong, because she showed that it worked, and her grandmother showed her, and her grandmother showed her. So if you do that for 1,000 generations, from 10,000 years ago, it's coming down, 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 down. It's uninterrupted. It's not just random knowledge that's taken out of a synthetic laboratory. And so Ayurveda says that that's our ancient knowledge. I can't deny what my ancestors knew to be true, because they watched it, they observed it. And now I'm using it myself and I'm observing that it's true. How can I deny that this is something real? Once we admit that to ourselves, we find that we are trying to validate what was ancient with what is modern. And that's where the bridging comes in. So there's one concept that I want you to be thinking about when you're saying, well, my Ayurvedic person, my Ayurvedic physician or someone I know recommended something to me. This is the concept of okasatmya, which actually has to do with what was, I'll explain it this way. What was in your biochemical machinery when you grew up? If you were an Indian person, but you grew up in Thailand, your dad was posted there, or your mom was a professor there, and you grew up in Thailand with Thai food, Thai air, Thai soil, Thai water, then your biochemical machinery will grow with those things. And that will become your Oka Satmya. Your epigenetics will adjust to that particular environment, we can say, or that ecosystem. And so even if you are that way in your youth, and then you move back to India, or you move to the United States or somewhere in Europe, you're going to find that the biochemical machinery is already set. It's not that it can't not be changed, but it's not easily changed, because that's what your childhood machinery is. It's kind of like the way you learn language. Whatever you learn, whatever you're listening to from the age of 2 to 6, you can become fluent in any language, but those will be your languages. You can be ethnically 100% Tamil, but if you grow up in Russia and you speak fluent Russian, maybe some Ukrainian, maybe some Finnish, maybe depending on where you are in Russia, but you just don't have any contact with any Tamil people except your parent, and that person doesn't speak with you at home, you will find that you never learn Tamil easily. You can go back to the Tamil land and try to learn it, but it won't be that easy. The same thing with your epigenetic DNA for your body's gut metabolism, the way that you eat certain foods and do certain routines. So this concept of okasatmya is very important because some of the recommendations of Ayurveda, for example, don't eat or mix vegetables with milk. That's one of the rules. Don't mix acidic things with milk. That's one of the rules. So I had a student in New York who's Italian who said, but we are so used to having bruschetta, which is tomatoes and mozzarella cheese on a piece of fresh bread. Tomatoes are acidic. They are citric acid. They are vegetables. And mozzarella cheese is dairy and it's milk-based. How can you tell me that you cannot eat these two together when we've been eating them? Also lasagna, also many of the Italian dishes. How can you tell me? It's like, Ayurveda must be wrong because it says these rules and they don't apply to me. And I pulled out this understanding of okasatmya, that her epigenetics had gotten used to it, but the people that were writing the books were in India and they were used to the Indian ecosystems, so many of them from north, south, east, west India. And that is why when you take recommendations, you have to remember that if you're in the southern hemisphere, it'll be different for you than in the northern hemisphere. If you are in a land like Japan, where you're eating raw fish and soybeans, it's going to be very different than having rice and dal. Okay, so do remember that Ayurveda does understand this. And one of the reasons it understands this is because Akhand Bharat, which is the ancient Bharat, went from Afghanistan all the way through the Indian subcontinent, down across Burma, down and all the way to the Indian islands, which are Indonesia. So Indonesia is the islands of India. And so this entire area of the Indian Ocean rim was Bharat, was where Ayurveda was being practiced. And you can just imagine how many geoclimes there are. There are islands, there's ocean, there's mountain, there is tropic, there is cold weather, there is hot weather. There's, river and forest, everything. And so Ayurveda applied to all those people, knowing that there were different strokes for different folks. I have put this in because many people ask about, well, what about ghee? And I think it's actually out of place, but I'll go ahead and speak about it here because it's here. Ghee is one of those magical elixirs that are unique to Ayurveda. And I put it here also because our cells are made of these fats called lipid bilayers, and biochemistry has detailed how this works. But the idea of ghee has been vilified. It's been made unpopular to most of you. And people say, well, how can I eat that much ghee? It's bad for my health, isn't it? Pure ghee, which is made in the right way from pasture-raised, happy Gir cows, not Jersey cows, and feed their babies first before they give you the milk. Those mommy cows give you wonderful milk, which should then be turned to yogurt, which should be churned. And then the stuff, when you churn it, will come up to the top. That's the butter, the cream butter. It's not butter, it's not cream anymore because it's been yogurt. It's been made into yogurt. So when that comes up, that's called butter. Navanita is the Sanskrit word. And then that is heated to make ghee, which is what this is, this picture. That ghee that I'm talking about is deeply medicinal and has wonderful properties for relieving cholesterol problems. The issue is that the study that came out that was very popular to vilify and make ghee bad was in the Lancet, and they did not use this ghee that I just described. They just used some desi ghee that was probably made from butter. It was made from cow poo, milk pooled from thousands of cows that possibly was not turned first to yogurt. And so you want to make sure that even if you use butter to make your own ghee at home, you use cultured butter, means the milk was made to yogurt and then the yogurt was made to butter. Then you can use that butter to make ghee. And one more thing is that you should always make it on the Purnima, the full moon, because that gives you the best effect of ghee because of the way that the water principle exists around the full moon, as we know from the tides in the oceans. The water quality is different. This slide also talks about some of the biochemistry of qi and talks about these CLAs, conjugate linoleic acids, which are very, very important for the whole balance of the cholesterols. So when people come to me with high cholesterol, I just tell them to just spend them, instead of spending 60 rupees for a tablet of statin, spend the money on very good quality qi and then watch your body reestablish the balance. So again, my apologies that was out of order, but I did put that in there. So after I spoke about these modalities, what I was wanting to talk about is all the reasons why we don't have good Ayurvedic textbooks, translations, and teachers. And the reason is that Ayurveda requires many, many different languages and many, many different disciplines. And just like a silo, they're right next to each other, but they have this wall between them that keeps them separate. This is what happens in departments in universities. There's one department here, and you have to go to the front entrance just to get to the other department. They will not talk to each other. So in order to understand Ayurveda, you have to understand some Sanskrit. You cannot use pure English translations. You have to understand subatomic and subtle energy forces in physics and also in material science. You have to understand chemistry. You have to understand geology and where rocks come from and where foods grow in agriculture. You have to understand plant sources. You have to understand how to take those plants and make them into food, you know, whether by heat or by the right amount of oil or sugar or salt or spices. You have to understand then how that goes, that food or that medicine goes into the body and changes the biochemistry, and how those foods act as drugs to invoke changes in the organ systems of the body. You have to understand clinical medicine, the biggest of which is gut physiology. And if you don't understand all of these, it's very hard to understand what is Ayurveda. And indeed, that's the difficulty today. Most people do not understand. In fact, even the Ayurvedic doctors have a very hard time to talk between different disciplines. One of the great principles of Ayurveda is this idea, which is typified in a shloka that says, Yatha pinde tatha brahmande. So pindis are these little small collections of sesame seeds with little grains of rice. And Brahmande is the universe or the galaxy. And so what this shloka is saying is, as in the microcosm, so in the macrocosm. And so Ayurveda says the patterns of spirals that are there in very, very, very small DNA or spirals in very small collections of atoms and molecules are similar in their properties as very small shells, as are large tornadoes or turns of water in like tsunamis, as are the galaxy, the Milky Way. And so here you can see that if you look at these logarithmic scales, modern medicine really works from the nanoscale, which is 10 to the minus 9, to the meter scale, which is 10 to the 0. It doesn't really work with 10 to the 1, which is 10 meters. Most of our medicines are not 10 meters long, although you could say an MRI machine might be that long. But most of our medicines themselves are from the meter to the 10 to the minus 9 nanometer, all of our molecules, all of our understanding of modern medicine. But Ayurveda goes from the yoctometer, which is 10 to the minus 24, to the yotameter, which is 10 to the plus 24. If you look at Avogadro's number, what is it? 10 to the minus 23. They say that's the amount of molecules are in 1 mole, right? Remember Avogadro's number? So 10 to the minus 23 is what's the lowest limit of chemistry. Ayurveda says, yeah, but beyond particles, there are waves. There's subtle energy. We know that there's stuff happening in subtle energy. Like when I pass information from my mouth, I'm speaking to you and you're understanding it. There's no particle that's passing over to you. It's information on a wave of sound. And that is 10 to the minus 24. It's waves, not particles. And if you go all the way up to 10 to the plus 24, you're looking at the Milky Way galaxy, huge, which Ayurveda says also has an effect on you when it talks about Jyotish. So when you have a medical system that is so vast in its understanding, or its at least theories of how things work to affect the human body and affect your medical being, how can you take something that's so limited from 10 to the 0 to 10 to the -9? So just as a child will argue with its mother and say, mommy, mommy, this is true. The mother doesn't say, you're stupid, you don't know. The mother says, oh, you're small. You only understand this much. So Ayurveda says modern medicine is small. It only understands this much. In time, hopefully, it will get to understand a larger continuum of yatha pinde, tata brahmande. And so Ayurveda just says we understand things at a larger scope of perception, which we call axiomatic. Axiomatic means it applies here and applies here and applies here. So these scales of perception. And if you remember that, it'll make sense to you that Ayurveda is the way it is. I'm just going to share a couple of slides about food, and then we'll take some questions and we can move forward, because there's a lot of things that I'm sure you guys are thinking about, and I'm happy to answer those questions. So when we teach Ayurvedic nutrition, there are 2 chapters from this book, which is the book right there on the screen. This book is called the Ashtanga Hridayam, and it's one of the classic textbooks of Ayurveda. The other one is the Charaka Samhita that you saw earlier. In the Ashtanga Hridayam, there are 2 main chapters that specifically talk about foods. And they are chapter of the sutras on chapter 5 and 6. And so if you just look here, you see all the different foods it goes through. And if you go through one by one, you will be so impressed at the detail with which Ayurveda understands how to use food as medicine. And if you can use it, what you'll find is that, let me see if I have one example of that. I think I didn't put it into my introductory slides, but no, I don't have. So I was going to show you one about one of the foods, either dal or fruits or something. And it's so interesting to see the way that they conceived the foods and understood that if you eat this at this season or at this time of day, it's going to give you that effect, which is deleterious, versus that effect, which is going to help correct your imbalance. So with that food, let me show you some books that you might be interested in. Bhava Prakash is one of the best books to read. It's one of the classic 6 main texts of Ayurveda. But there are others like the Bhojana, which means meal, Kutuhalam, and the, I think you can see here, the Kshema Kutuhalam. These are available online. There are a couple of different translations here and a couple of different translations here. And these are also different translations, the Bhava Prakasha. So these classic texts have been around since the 10th, 11th century, 1,000 years. And that food description still applies today, which is amazing. Ayurveda doesn't just talk about food, it talks about the who, what, when, where, why of food. When you should eat, who you should eat with, where you should eat, where you should not eat, when you should not eat, what you should not have around you when you're eating, why you should eat certain foods at certain times of the day, what order you should take them in, how you should eat. And to take things into your body is called ahara. And so the ancient concepts look at what to do and they just give prescriptions. The modern bridge is to look at something like this, where you take the Kalabhojanam strategy and you observe, this particular article observes intermittent fasting and the data, the modern data in modern sciences around why it is that certain, you can say prescriptions or advices were applicable then, but that they make sense according to our logic of today. Now, when we talk about Ayurveda biology, which is this, fantastic new term that we've been using for the last few years, Ayurvedic biology is simply the use of molecules. So molecular biology is looking at biology in terms of molecules and defining molecules underlying every single transaction, interaction, and reaction. And looking at molecules and defining things by their molecules is a trend that's really become popular, really since DNA got discovered, but more since we've learned how to work with DNA and seen how epigenetics work. And when we've realized that the microbiome and the bacteria are working by sending molecules across from our gut to our immune system. This molecular rationale, this molecular logic is what people say is scientific. So when they say, oh, what's the scientific basis? What they're looking for is a molecule. So if you can say that there is a dinacharya brahma muhurta uttishtet, okay, that's okay. But if you can say there's melatonin and the clock genes are affected by the melatonin, which affects the serotonin and affects various hypothalamus molecules, then it's considered to be scientific. So Ayurveda is engaged in that kind of a translation, or you can say not translation, but at least adaptation, even though Ayurveda is its own science and continues to be its own science. When I also teach about Ayurveda, I take it from the ancient recommendations to the modern. So I'm appalled and still somewhat surprised at how little Indians know about the way the food is processed. So I go through the 7 deadly white foods and I talk in detail. Vidya's in some of my Dinacharya masterclasses, so she knows. I've talked about salt, sugar, flour, rice, milk, eggs, oil, where they come from, which grains to eat, which grains not to eat, why Ayurvedic Shastra said to eat this, and how things have been processed. So what the modern translation of that is. Why sugar is actually really great for healing the liver, but why modern sugar, granulated sugar like you see here, is actually poisonous for us. It's because of the processing. So we also have all kinds of information about Ayurvedic nutrition that I could share with you. I'm going to end with something about medicines, which I think is very important because I happen to do my PhD on metals and minerals. And that concept is called the human metallome. So if you want to understand medicines, you must understand that there are minerals in the body that affect the way in which all the different functions of the body occur. And this metallome is like the collection, it is the collection of metals that you must have in your body. When they get depleted, your enzymes stop working the way they did. And what Ayurveda discovered is that if you add them back in, you can't just throw them back in. So if I'm anemic, I can't just eat a bar of iron. I'm going to die from the poisoning because you have to process that iron so it can get into the growing red blood cells, into your hemoglobin to affect your hemoglobin or your red blood cells. So how do you get it into that subtle, small crevice of your body, right? You can't just drop down like a helicopter would drop down a pile of provisions. It doesn't work that way. You have to get into those crevices. Bhasmas are the way to do that. And so the science of making bhasmas is a science of restoring those metals and minerals. And what we find is that diseases that are incurable or very hard to work with are oftentimes cured by using bhasmas. So people who have learned to use bhasmas have learned how to replenish these minerals. And because of COVID, I looked into one of the enzymes of the human lung, which is called the extracellular superoxide dismutase. And it turns out that there are all these minerals and metals, especially copper and zinc, which we were using in bhasma form to get into the lungs. And we were finding fantastic results with that. And when people ask, how does it work? I actually just published a paper that has been released last week. It's a case report of how we used bhasmas on a man who was told to basically go home and prepare his affairs because he was so sick from COVID, from long COVID, that he wasn't getting better. And we used these bhasmas, repaired his mineral status, and he was completely weaned off all of his drugs and his oxygen ventilator within 3 weeks. And so things are possible that are thought to be impossible if you know what you're doing. And with that, I will pause and see if Dr. Bijlani or ma'am, if you have any questions, or if any of the group have any questions. I can talk about many other topics, but I think it'll be nice to take some questions. Thank you for listening to me. Namaste.
Thank you, Bhaswati, for a very illuminating talk. You are one of those rare persons trained in modern medicine and understood its science so well, yet you were not hypnotized by it. And at the same time, you also retained a healthy respect and an open mind towards ancient Indian wisdom. And in go about understanding the Indian wisdom in a proper, serious manner by going into the original roots of Ayurveda, and thereby become a synthesis of the ancient and the modern. And interestingly, modern medicine is moving in that direction. When I was doing studying modern medicine, started in 1965, if anybody would have talked about the relationship between the mind and the body, the person would have told, well, there may be some relationship, but that is not really what is important. You can address most of the medical problems and deal with health and disease without bothering about the mind-body relationship. But if somebody talked about the gut influencing all the other systems of the body, that person would have been ridiculed. But now in modern medicine, we do have a well-established understanding of the mind-body relationship, which psychoneuroimmunology has put on a firm footing. And we also, after the microbiome is one of the latest sort of pieces of research, which during the last few decades has reached a point where we can understand how the microflora, the microbiome in the gut can influence just about every other disease. So the mind and the gut, the two things that you emphasized, is something that modern medicine has gradually started inching towards. Not that Ayurveda needs that type of certification, but in the modern world, it does help convince people that Ayurveda might have had other methods of talking about these things. They might have a different language, which is understandable because languages do change over thousands of years. And they might have even had other methods of arriving at this knowledge. They might not have had just the laboratories that we have today. And of course, you mentioned a large number of sciences which one needs to understand in terms of modern science, and that type of integration we don't have. But then apart from all those branches of science which help us understand Ayurveda better, is also the laboratory of consciousness, which becomes another source of truth, which the modern mind does not sufficiently understand. But then the Ayurvedic physicians of the ancient times were not just physicians, they were also rishis, and therefore had access to that those realms of knowledge which are beyond the ordinary mental consciousness. So with that, I think we can see if there are any questions in the chat, or anyone wants to ask a question.
Yeah, there's a question in the chat about the conch shell that Vidya has. Vidya, did you want to elaborate on which alternative to conch shell you were talking about?
No, you had said conch shell. Another thing you mentioned to use for when you were mentioning, I think I missed. You said conch shell or something, you know, for or was it only conch shell used?
Or what? In context of what?
No, you said for no, people can't blow the conch shell. If you try to blow the conch shell, it has to go in one stream. You're saying for in your breathing.
I was saying to help yourself breathe.
Yeah.
Use the conch shell, or you can use the clock. The clock will allow you to say 1 second, 2 second, 3 second, 4 second, 5
Okay,
second.
okay.
So sometimes people say, I'll hold for a count of 6, and then I'll breathe in for a count of 6, and then I'll hold for a count of 6, and then I'll breathe out for a count of 6.
Okay.
And that 6 can be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, or it can be 1, 2, 3. So that's why I said use a clock. But if you also want to just increase your ability, your what's called your tidal volume, you can use the conch shell, And the reason for that is that most of us who own a conch shell have been using it since we were children. We know how to blow, we know how to put our lips, and we know how hard to blow and how long we can blow for. And so when people lose their lung capacity after either pneumonia or after they had COVID pneumonia, it was really important to get rid of that lung fibrosis. And the way that many people were breaking it open was by using spirometers, where they blow in and there's a green and then a yellow and then a red ball. But those are like weird. First of all, they're like 1,800 rupees. But secondly, they are not like, they're foreign to many people. So if you could use instead a conch shell, which you've been familiar with since childhood, it's always better, because you know exactly what you need to do to get from the 8 seconds that you can blow now back to the 30 seconds you can blow. So I was giving the two options, the clock or the conch shell. Okay, nice to see you, Vidya. I haven't seen you in a little bit. So
Yeah. Yes.
Vidya was in my class, which was called The Conscious Diet. It was about plant-based Ayurvedic nutrition that I taught last year. And she had lots of questions, and we went through each and every food group. And
Yeah, that kindled a lot of interest for me in Ayurveda, and I've been watching a lot of videos and reading also a lot of things.
Great.
Of course, I'm not a science student, so whatever I can incorporate in the lifestyle, that can be done. So,
Wonderful.
Yeah.
You've done a great job. There's another question. Thank you, Vidya. There's another question from Mahesh about Panchakarma. Mahesh? You have to, yeah.
Yes. Hello. Yeah.
Hello. Namaste.
Namaste. So yeah, my question was, I was just wondering, because what you spoke about initially on the, the emissary veins, and I was kind of just something triggered based on that, because I've read, about Panchakarma and the way we know it as something which really is a complete cleansing process, right? Which Ayurveda has, and that's quite well established. But I've read in a few places that more than just cleansing the colon or cleansing the gut and doing all of that, it also kind of really cleanses at a like a very deep, like almost at a cellular level. And I was just wondering whether it's something similar which is working, like like the oil which goes in through the emissary veins that you spoke about on the head. Is there something similar going on? Because I know that like the first phase of Panchakarma, you're actually doing the the ghee drink, the consumption of the snehapana and all of that. So I was wondering if something similar is going on there, some kind of osmosis is taking place, and is that why it works so well?
See, I think the first step is you have to get a better sense of anatomy, both gross anatomy from the whole organism, then the area of the body, then the organ, if it's in the trunk, and then the tissue sets in the trunk, and then the cellular level. So the way that I talk about Panchakarma with people and explaining it is I talk about you having a bunch of junk in your house and you want to get it out. Now, you can take it out of your bedroom and put it in your living room, but that doesn't still clean it, right? It's still in the cell. It's still in the cell of your house. So you have to clean it out. And if you just clean out the floors that you usually walk on, that doesn't clean the cell, the room either. You have to start at the ceiling, go down the walls, do the windows, the crevices behind the furniture, under the furniture, on top of the furniture, under the bed, and then get all of that together, right? The jharu pocha that goes on every morning, and put that together. Now, if you just leave that in one place in the room, it'll rescatter and it'll make a mess, which is what happens if the phone rings or the dudwala comes right when you're doing your jharu. So you're supposed to take what you gathered and put it together, either, pick it up or put it on something and then throw it away. But if you throw it away in the garbage can and leave it in that garbage can or in that dustbin, that's still not enough. You have to take that and send it out of your house. But if you send it out of your house and you leave it right in your front gate area, that's also not enough, because then that can also spread back into your driveway, back into your entrance of your home. And this is what happens when people do Panchakarma for 2 days or 5 days or 10 days. You start getting clean, but you don't get further. Now, when you're talking about the gut, think about the highway, the big highway in your town or in your city. For me to get this garbage out, I can't just put it out on my front gate, and I can't just put it right outside my front gate on my street or my lane. It has to go from my lane through the main street and out into a larger place. Now, let's say it's not just some dust. Let's say it's an old electronic, I don't know, refrigerator or something, right? To get that out of your house, down the stairs and outside the front door is still not enough. You've got to get a truck to carry it off the lane, out of the street, past the main road or avenue and onto the highway and out to the recycling center. So what Panchakarma does is it first makes sure the highway is not jammed up. And the biggest highway of your body is your gut. So first it'll work with your rectum and anus and make sure everything that's waiting to go out goes out. But then it'll start from your stomach, down your intestines and through your colon and then down your rectum and make sure that's clean. Now that that main highway is clean, all the feeder lanes or streets or boulevards from all your organs can feed into the gut and send things into that central canal and out. And so when we use oil, we are getting those lanes kind of ready and cleaned out. We're using oil to get rid of all of the what we call lipophilic or the kind of, you know how old oil is sticky and kind of adherent. We're using oil to really liquefy dirt and get it out. Because if it was just water soluble, the water you drink would have sent it out. It's all the non-water soluble. So you have polar, non-polar, or hydrophilic, hydrophobic, all these chemical terms. So the water takes care of things pretty regularly. It's the fat soluble stuff that builds up. So we use ghee as you did inside, and then we use ghee on the outside so that seeps in through the skin. I had another slide that was similar to the hair oil slide that's about the interstitium, which is this layer, it's this highway that's under the skin that sends things out. And Panchakarma systematically looks at, just as I've talked about the garbage in your bedroom, through your living room, into your main hall, down the stairs, out of your apartment building or your main big bungalow, just like that, your cells need to be cleaned out. And once they're cleaned out and everything is empty, there is a hole, there's a gap where it's been holding stuff before. It's like when you have a lot of newspapers in your house, you clear them out and then suddenly the newspaper area, like the coffee table, looks so empty. What happens? Suddenly you want to go and put something there. So what happens is after people have Panchakarma, a lot of people start having junk food and they just refill the junk that they've taken out with more junk. So Panchakarma usually ends prematurely for most people because most doctors are not doing it properly. I have yet to meet, there's a lot of them that do it theoretically well, but I've yet to meet a single doctor in India or America who does Panchakarma the way it's said properly in the text. There were a few before, but now profit is such a big thing that they will do it the wrong way, knowing it's the wrong way. So what they should do is get through the Panchakarma, get you cleaned out, and then keep you for another 2 weeks and feed you good food so those empty crevices are filled with nourishment. And that means local rice, poha, idli, sambar, clean food, no refined oil, no Tata sea salt, no granulated sugar, but lots of jaggery and mishri and samudra lavan and all the right kinds of nourishing foods and none of the wrong kinds. Can you do it at home? Absolutely, you can. Do most people do it? No, they don't. And that's the problem. So Panchakarma is not just cleaning out the crevices and cleaning out the cells. It's setting up the body so the cells stay clean. And I have seen real wonders done with Panchakarma when it's done right, when it's done properly. I mean, I have several friends who are Panchakarma physicians, but they're all cutting corners, which is very sad.
Thank you so much. I mean, that's really, really, great kind of understanding of putting it all together. Thank you.
I hope that you got a lot out of that. I've taken years and years to learn how to explain this. Yeah. And I find that this analogy seems to work really well for people.
Spot on. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. So thank you, Dr. Bijlani, for having me. I think you're on mute.
Having you again in the YES course, YES.02.
Great. Namaste to all.
Bhaswati, screen or continue sharing or
Oh, I'll just stop sharing. Yes, I'm so sorry about that. That was my fault.
All right. That just brings us to the end of yet another Yes Talk. Thank you, Dr. Bhattacharya, for spending time and enlightening us with so many insights into this whole idea of Ayurveda and how we can bring it to our life. And people who have joined us, I would just also let you know that soon we'll be starting the Yes 0.2 module on Ayurveda, and Dr. Bhattacharya will also be taking few classes. So if you haven't registered yet, you may send in your registrations on yes@yesspirituality.com, or you can just, the email which you receive from the invitations for Yes Talk, you can also write back to us on that and we will register you for the course. So thank you everyone once again. We end with the meditative music as usual. See you next time. Thank you everyone.